What's up? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me. As I start out on my YouTube journey and dip my toes into the many dirty puddles of horror, I knew one thing was that I wanted to cover horror movies. And that's why I'm going to be starting a segment that will be known as the Dread Den. What better way to kick it off than with a modern take on slashers, but still has a timeless 80s nostalgic feel. That is why we're talking about Damien Leone's Terrifier 2. This movie is a follow-up to the 2016 Terrifier starring David Howard Thornton as Art the Clown. In Terrifier 2, we pick up where the first movie left off, on Halloween night, with Art the Clown encroaching upon a coroner, in which Art had inflicted a mortal wound to said coroner's neck. He briefly stops to take a look in the mirror that is in the coroner's office, taking the time to admire the hole in his head from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. This is where automatically the viewer is subject to a taste of things to come in terms of the director's approach to gross out his viewers as Art begins to feel around the exit wound of the gunshot that he had self-inflicted. This movie is not shy in the least bit about the gore it portrays, and I am much obliged to this approach. Art can further be seen rubbing the blood of his wound onto the mirror, spelling out his name in an obvious sense of pride with his handiwork, and a decrepit sadistic smile reflecting back for the audience to see. Back to business we see as Art turns back towards the coroner, who at this point is on the phone with the police. However, he cannot respond to any of the dispatcher's questions because he is too busy gurgling on the blood from getting nothing short of a necktie that I would never want to wear. This is where we get a little glimpse of the dark, comedic style aspect of Art's nature. He simply and calmly reaches for the phone and hangs it up on the receiver as the police dispatch can be heard saying police are on their way. You see, Art does not talk, so all of his gestures are made exclusively through facial expressions and body language, and it is a delight. Continuing on, the coroner stares up to Art to see his sadistic smile and sunken eyes. Well, he is missing one from the end of the first movie. And Art begins to deliver multiple blows to the coroner's head with a small surgical steel mallet. And we begin to see Art's resourcefulness as he plucks out one of the coroner's eyes and retrofits it into his own eye socket. Not sure how that works, but goddamn, the clown is handy. After obtaining his newly acquired eye, Art proudly tilts his head to the viewer with a "hey, how do I look?" kind of silent laughing. But not a moment later, he decides to finish off the coroner because, let's be honest, my boy Art is a busy man. It's Halloween and there are unsuspecting people that need to be set straight. So after finishing up with Mr. Coroner and tearing his entire cranium apart to remove his brains, there is no good time unless it is senselessly gory to Art. He decides it is time to get out of Dodge before law enforcement arrives. He puts a bunch of surgical tools in a black trash bag to craft his kill kit and sets out on his merry way to wreak havoc on a fresh Halloween night. We follow Art as he nonchalantly walks into a laundromat, his clown suit soaked in blood, and we see there is a man snoozing in a chair, no wiser to the evil that just came walking in through the door. Art promptly strips down and throws his bloody clothes in the wash cycle. Have to respect a man who cleans up for his next job. He picks up a newspaper, and here we get another look at just how deranged he is as he begins to silently laugh at an article in the newspaper that is about the death of a family in a motor accident. Whilst enjoying his read of the paper, the power to the washing machine that he is using cuts out, to which Art goes from his noiseless laughter to a look of annoyance. Now, this is arguably my favorite part of Art the Clown, is these moments of annoyance that he has. It's the pinnacle of comedy genius in this type of genre, and David Howard Thornton did a lot of research on silent comedy and had a lot of inspiration to get into this role, so his expressions are bar none. To have a silent killer that has a huge amount of screen time requires dominating and captivating roles, and David Howard Thornton just crushes it. Getting back to the story, Art turns around from his chair in the laundromat and he is met with the creepy, wide-eyed look of a smile from a child. However, this child has similarly ghastly-looking clown paint on. Art stares blankly at her and waves in response to her wave, and we are thrown into a bit of confusion as from a lower angle of the chair we see a vomitous black liquid spew out from between her legs. The little clown girl then approaches Art and begins to poke him in his damaged eye socket, which they both begin to have a laugh together. A silent hee-haw, if you will. We're not sure who this little girl is, however she seems to be some kind of demonic spawn just like Art himself. But just as we, the viewers, are making guesses at piecing this relationship together, the sleeping man in the laundromat wakes up. We begin to see that he is confused at this point when he looks over at Art to see a partially nude clown playing patty cake all by himself, no little girl in sight. So as if Art already wasn't a psychopathic killer clown, he's also delusional too. Anyways, Art's clothes are ready to go and not a moment too soon because time is of the essence for Art. Again, he is a busy man, there's a town to bring sadistic horrors to. As the camera is following Art out the door of the laundromat, it stops in frame to see the man who is sleeping with the end of a snapped-off mop handle stuck into the top of his head, just before transitioning to the title of the movie. 8 minutes in, and we're just now seeing the title. Now, considering where this movie is a little over 2 hours long, and we've already witnessed some pretty freaky shit, so buckle up, it's only gonna get more brutal. Much more brutal. Now the opening credits roll to the beat of some synthwave music. The music in this movie is awesome and nostalgic in all the right ways, so in that regard it just adds to how incredibly fun this movie is. Opening credits are rolling, and we are introduced to our protagonist of the movie, Sienna, played by Lauren Lavera. She is working on her Halloween costume in a very cosplay style by handcrafting this almost Viking-looking outfit that, as the story goes on, we will find out that her father, whom at the time of this movie has already passed, designed for her in a sketchbook. We also see that she has a short sword on her dresser, which goes with her outfit, but remember, I'm saying this because that sword will become important later. Aside from the voice of the dispatcher on the phone in the beginning of the movie, this is where we get our first bit of dialogue as Sienna goes to the kitchen looking for some crafting supplies for her outfit, and we can find her mother, Barbara, played by Sarah Voight, cooking the shit out of some family dinner. Some back and forth dialogue gives us the idea that Sienna and her mother don't seem to see eye to eye, and Barbara is a bit on the tough mom side of things. As the scene shifts to the dinner table, we see Barbara and Sienna joined by her little brother, Jonathan, played by Elliot Fulham. We get an idea from this scene that Jonathan seems to be a clever kid with morbid curiosities, which he isn't shy about bringing up stories around the dinner table, to which his mother gives him a little pep talk as to not speak of these things such at the dinner table.
Jonathan, what have I told you about minding your manners at supper?
For Halloween, Jonathan mentions that he wants to dress up as Art the Clown, for there are tales of his deadly spree in the news from the first movie. He is met with a not-so-surprising response of hostility as to why he wants to dress like a real-life killer from both his sister and mother. We see Barbara and Sienna in the kitchen expressing their concerns to one another over Jonathan's fascination of the occult, which will set up parts of the movie for later. After some more brief exchange in the kitchen between Sienna and her mother, alongside some cuts to Jonathan researching the internet articles of Art's deadly killing spree, we are taken back to watch Sienna put more work in her symbolic costume with some more pleasing synthwave music in the background. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, this movie isn't gonna blow you off your feet in terms of acting. However, going into this movie with the expectations to have good, chaotic fun will yield a pleasant surprise for horror enthusiasts and average horror enjoyers alike. It has a sense of messy and cheesy charm. I mean, let's keep it real, we're watching a movie about a sadistic killer clown, don't expect Joaquin Phoenix Gladiator level acting. As Sienna is working on her costume, we see Jonathan walk in asking for help on his costume, to which Sienna gives him a little bit of shit that he still wants to go out as Art the Clown, but she plays the cool big sis role and helps him out anyways. Here is where we can see her and her brother have somewhat of a reciprocating relationship, where they seem to protect one another and where they care about each other, which we'll see a little bit more throughout the movie. We then see Sienna relaxing in bed watching some TV before she's about to doze off to go to sleep, and she does doze off, and we are plunged into a weird sequence in which there is a commercial on the TV that has a clown woman playing a little banjo singing about coming down to the clown cafe. When I say weird sequence 2, I mean it. We're transported to the set of this commercial that feels like a fever dream, where there are a bunch of teenage-looking people on a swing set waiting for Art the Clown to come out and grace them with all sorts of deranged goodies. We also see that Sienna is at the top of the slide of this swing set jungle gym-like thing, and she is watching in horror as Art presents her with a gift that is wrapped in newspaper. And what's in that gift, you might ask? That's right, a human heart that is still beating with worms and fleshy matter all around it. When all of a sudden, after fishing around in his trusty black trash bag, Art pulls out a Tommy gun and decides to essentially execute everyone on the set. He then finds a torch and decides to light the clown woman with the banjo on fire, and she continues playing as Art is spreading fire everywhere. We get foreshadowing glimpses outside of this dream of Sienna back in her bed before we jump back into the dream, where Art now has his sights set on Sienna and is approaching her with the torch. But just as he's about to dispel fire upon her, she pulls out that sword I was talking about and blocks the fire, and abruptly the dream ends where she is awoken to her costume that she had been working on in a full combusted state. Downstairs, we see her mother yelling at her to no surprise, thinking that it was the candles she had left going before falling asleep that was the cause of the fire. She berates her and sends her to bed, but not before Sienna goes back to her room to see the results of the fire damage. and to her surprise, the only thing not damaged by the fire was her sword.
Are you seeing the importance of this sword?
Jump back over, and now we're in a location that seemingly looks like a basement or some kind of dilapidated room where Art is working on crafting together some signature weapons that we had seen in the first movie. On the ground, sitting with her legs crossed over again, we see the little clown girl watching the TV with a clip from the first movie in which an interviewer was interviewing one of Art's former victims that had survived but had been horribly disfigured. As Art and the little girl are watching the former victims, they are smiling and laughing until Art kicks the TV in anger when the woman during the interview claims she witnessed Art's death. Now on a schoolyard, we see Jonathan and similar age younger kids poking and prodding at a dead possum on the ground. They call over a little girl to scare the bejesus out of her before the school principal comes over and gives them an earful and sends the boys to their classes. The scene jumps over to Jonathan in his classroom, now staring around the room in a reflective yet spacey state when his teacher blurts out for him to keep his eyes on his own paper. Jonathan then asks to be excused. We then see Jonathan strolling through the hall of his school to get some water and clear his head. When out of the corner of his eyes he sees the little clown girl run by. Unsure of what he just saw was real, he goes to investigate. He goes down some stairs, hooks a couple of corners to find Art the Clown and the clown girl sitting on the floor having a grand old time rocking the dead possum carcass from the schoolyard around like it's an infant before they sharply turn and set their sights on Jonathan. And they hum that dead possum body at him so that he gets blood and guts covered all over his clothes at this point. As one might guess, he runs away but not before running into a teacher, to which he jukes out of the way and runs out of the school. The teacher then walks around the corner and stumbles upon the carcass of the possum, and as you can guess, a phone call is probably heading to Jonathan's house, as he was the one last assumed to be near the dead possum. We then jump over to the scene of Sienna at her school in the lunch line, and this is where we are introduced to Sienna's friends, Allie and Brooke. Sienna tells her friends about the fire from the previous night before briefly, and they have an exchange about how Sienna is feeling about something strange happening the night before. As we cut to the next scene, just as we suspected, we see an officer at the house explaining the situation to Barbara, and boy is she pissed. She sends Jonathan to his room. Now we see Sienna and her friend out at a rather large and epic Halloween store so that she can get a last-minute set of wings for her costume that had gone up in flames during the previous night. All of a sudden, she runs into Art in the store and is frozen. We are now treated to classic Art the Clown antics as he puts on an array of comical Halloween accessories and downright acts like an annoying bastard with horns and etc. It's just great. Sienna wraps up her shopping trip not a moment too soon and rushes out the door of the store, before Art follows her to the front door and locks it behind her, foreshadowing for things to come as the cashier is about to have a bad day. And that is where the cashier was about to wrap up his shift, but before going home, tisk tisk, Art has different plans for him. Now, I'm not going to go over a lot of the details about the ways that Art carries out his killings, just because they're far too gruesome for YouTube. But I will say that you definitely need to watch this movie because they are fun and just absolutely over the top. Fast forward a little bit and we see a combative session in Jonathan's room with Barbara, Sienna, and Jonathan over Art the Clown and how Jonathan gets blamed for the dead possum, etc., etc. Jonathan pulls out his late father's sketchbook and shows Sienna some of the old drawings of Art the Clown, to which Sienna tries to explain to Jonathan that her father was just becoming mentally sick before passing to put Jonathan's mind at ease. All of this despite coming on the heels of the previous scene in the Halloween store with her running into Art. However, she just chalks that up to some other creep just deciding to go out as Art the Clown. So now we see Jonathan begging his sister not to go out for Halloween, for which he rightfully fears the worst for her. She assures him nothing will happen.
Yeah, right.
Anyways, let's jump ahead a little bit so we can get to some of the action. We see one of Sienna's friends whom she was supposed to be going to a party later with in the evening. She is handing out candy to trick-or-treaters at her home, to which she answers the next ring of the doorbell to find out is Art the Clown standing outside with a big trash bag waiting for her to drop a couple of tasty snackos in. She recognizes Art from the Halloween store that she had accompanied Sienna with earlier and calls out Art for being a weirdo, and she refuses to give any candy to him because he's an adult. But what she fails to realize is that Art is actually a sadist spawn that embodies pure evil. Just give my boy Art some candy, for goodness sake. He then continues to bang at the door after she closed it in his face. He bangs with authority, and ultimately she decides to give Art some candy, but to her dismay, when she catches a glimpse into Art's bag, she sees all of his bloody instruments. She slowly but swiftly shuts the door and locks it. She goes to the window and looks outside to see Art strolling on his way down the driveway. We flash back over to Sienna sitting on the couch watching the news, but kind of zoning out at the same time, and she comes back too when it sounds like the news anchor on TV says her name in some trippy fashion, to which we then cut over to a scene of Sienna racing to toss back some form of medication. Not quite sure if it's some kind of anti-anxiety or antipsychotic medication, but needless to say she feels like she needs it because she is lately losing touch with reality. Sienna seemingly calms down as some more awesome synthwave background music rolls in, and we see her getting ready in her costume that she worked so hard to put together. And in this part, the movie starts building on giving her the badass female protagonist vibe. We jump back over to Sienna's friend Allie, who is still home alone, but in the beginning works of putting herself together to go out when we hear a crashing sound downstairs in the house. She slowly exits the room, and we see her phone ringing, and we can see it's Sienna calling. However, she opts to go inspect the source of the noise instead of answering the phone. She comes downstairs to see the back sliding glass door smashed wide open, and she can see Art in the kitchen pouring himself a glass of water from the faucet before picking up a scalpel and some surgical shears and chasing her up the stairs to her room. Now, I really can't get into what Art does to her here because it is way too graphic, but let me just say that it involves lots of gore and torture, and Art is having a grand old time administering these wicked ways. This could be argued to be the most disturbing scene in the movie, so if you haven't seen the movie and plan on seeing it, just err on the side of caution because it's pretty gruesome. Following the gruesome scene, we see Allie's mom come home and yell up to her. To no response, she goes up to the room to check and see where she is, and this dovetails into the horror show that we just witnessed because she walks in to find her daughter's remains almost staged by Art for shock value. Now again, I can't really describe what is going on in this scene, but let me just say that the practical effects are phenomenal. It's a work of art. Get it? Art. I'll shut up now. Now we find ourselves in a nightclub with Sienna and her friend Brooke, waiting for Allie to call, but a call they will not get. They start taking shots when all of a sudden Brooke's quintessential cheeseball boyfriend Jeff enters the scene and starts partying with the girls. We clip back over to a scene outside of Allie's house with a bunch of children ringing the doorbell. Well, Art is prepared to serve up a real surprise to the kiddos as he answers the door with candy. However, nothing quite says the authenticity of a trick or treat like serving up candy in a human head, because that is what Art does. Yes, this man actually hollows out Allie's mom's head and serves up candy to the kids. Another awesome practical effect that adds to the gruesome charm of this movie is the children are all oohs and ahs and saying how real the head looks and feels as Art proudly smiles at the children. As the children leave happy saying Happy Halloween, we see Art waving goodbye to them and looking at his makeshift candy bowl head and laughing in silent hysterics, further adding to the somewhat comedic charm of Art. As evil as Art is, this movie kind of makes you want to root for his antics just because of how hysterical he is, and on the heels of every kill, he makes it some kind of performance. It's just kind of funny. Now we cut over to Barbara trying to extend an olive branch to Jonathan, but they get into an argument over Jonathan's obsession with his father's sketchbook and the tropes about Art the Clown. It leads into a fight, and Jonathan runs out of the house. As Jonathan is seen running down the street, we cut back over to the club where Sienna and Brooke are, and this is where we start seeing Sienna really start to feel the vibes. We briefly jump back to see that Barbara is feeling remorseful for the fight that she had with her son, and she goes to pour herself a glass of wine. She then goes to the garage because she hears the automatic door open, only to find that the family car is covered in shaving cream and some not-so-nice words written into the shaving cream, to which she assumes it's Jonathan being rebellious and flips her lid. We hop back over to the club to find Sienna is looking like she's really starting to feel the vibes now, but to find out that Brooke drugged her to make her feel good. We're going to fast forward again and catch up with Jonathan, who is now somewhere in the neighborhood when he sees Art's black van and slowly walks up to it. A radio can be heard from the van with some static, and it prompts him to go back to the house out of fear of something happening. As we see Barbara talking to herself while cleaning the shaving cream off the car, she wipes enough away for us to see Art is sitting in the seat of the car with a shotgun pointed directly at Barbara's face, and well, you can guess what happens next. Back at the club, we see Sienna have a freak out when she sees the little girl clown in the club. However, nobody else sees her, and Brooke and Jeff whisk her away before she makes too much of a scene. Back at Barbara's house, we see Jonathan arrive home to see his mother's body propped up in the chair at the dinner table. She's not looking too good. While Art comes out of the kitchen wearing a cooking apron and carrying mashed potatoes to the table, and I can't tell you exactly what he does with the mashed potatoes, but I will tell you that he's sure cracking himself up while he is essentially hand force-feeding them to an otherwise dead Barbara. He then retrieves a syringe from behind his apron, and after a bit of a struggle with Jonathan, he injects him with what appears to be a sedative to knock him out and abduct him. Likewise, he picks up the short sword from Sienna's room and looks over it before we cut back to a scene with Sienna's toxic-ass friend Brooke yelling at Sienna for having freaked out in the club. Maybe don't drug your friends? I don't know. Sienna gets a phone call from Jonathan pleading for her to come help him and that he is down at the old carnival in town. Problem is that it is a setup. The little clown girl can modify her voice to sound like Jonathan in the attempt to lure Sienna to the carnival. So Jeff and Brooke drive Sienna to the carnival. It's pitch black out and the vibes are foreboding with evil. Sienna gets out of the car and searches for her brother who desperately needs her help. Here's where we find out a little bit more about Sienna and Jonathan's father, whom we keep revisiting, and Brooke tells her boyfriend Jeff how he was mentally sick and becoming abusive to his loved ones, and how one day he snapped and drove his car into a light pole and the car caught fire and he burned to death. In the next scene, we see Sienna walking through the abandoned carnival where she gets a call from Jonathan's phone with static coming through the other end, and she tells Jonathan to text her back. But we know that on the other end of the phone is the clown girl because Jonathan is still unconscious and abducted. She gets a text from Jonathan's phone saying that he is stuck, and when Sienna says where, we get a kind of fun play on the name of the movie because the text reads back Terrifier, which is subsequently the name of the ride that Art and the clown girl are attempting to lure Sienna to. Jeff and Brooke stay in the car and do the whole lover's lane kind of thing while they wait for Sienna. Jeff has to get out to use the bathroom and he decides to relieve himself behind the car, and this is where Art strikes again. It is here that Art proceeds to repetitively stab Jeff in his manhood and then rips it right off. Whole hog. Pee-pee go bye-bye. Then holds it up against the driver's window for Brooke to see while she is frantically wailing in the car.
Oh no, my boyfriend's pee-pee!
He busts open the window, rips Brooke out before she quickly reacts and kicks Art in the face and attempts to escape, but in classic horror movie fashion, she trips, hurts her leg, and now she must hobble away while Art is in steady pursuit. Brooke makes it down to a hallway where she screams out for Sienna, and Sienna faintly hears her and rushes to her aid. We then see Brooke cut hard right into a dingy bathroom soaked from the ceiling to the floors with blood and gore. Art traps Brooke into a corner before splashing acid on her face and then brutalizing her with a table leg. Sienna, still rushing to the aid of Brooke, finds Brooke horribly disfigured remains in the bathroom, and while she whimpers in devastation for the trauma of finding her dead friend, Art watches from the corner before approaching Sienna. This is where we see a refreshed Jonathan enter the picture before running away as Sienna gets the crap kicked out of her. Having knocked Sienna out, Art goes on the chase for Jonathan, which he takes refuge behind a curtain in a hallway in an attempt to lose Art. But Art finds him, and with a scalpel, he makes several slashes in Jonathan. At this point, Big Sis has come to the rescue and creeps up behind Art, driving the table leg we formerly saw, that has nails in the end of it, straight into the back of Art's skull. Sienna and Jonathan, both being hurt, now attempt to escape Art's clutches before taking a moment to collect themselves. This is where Jonathan tells Sienna his theory about how their dad's sketches of Sienna's costume and the depiction of Art the clown, and that this was the vision that their father had for where Sienna was to defeat Art. Art catches up to Sienna and Jonathan and begins to pummel the both of them, this time with a chain whip with scalpels fastened to the ends. In a desperate attempt to protect Jonathan, she puts her body over his, where she takes multiple lashings before Sienna grabs the end of the whip and goes damn near Super Saiyan as she rips the whip away from Art and begins an onslaught of whooping his ass. She then grabs a nearby piece of rebar and drives it down into Art's skull as he slumps over, and thus bringing Art's reign of terror to an end. Art comes back to life and catches Sienna off guard and begins choking her. Jonathan grabs the sawn-off shotgun that is duct taped to his leg and cocks the hammer. Art makes a silly face and puts his hands up slowly, and Jonathan pulls the trigger, effectively blowing Art back onto the ground. A partially unconscious Sienna has a hallucination of her mother Barbara, and then the clown girl grabs Sienna's head, thus enlightening Sienna to the visions of what had happened to her mother. As she snaps out of it, she finds that Art's body was no longer in the spot in the place which he was shot, and Jonathan is also gone. Again. And it is here, again, that she quickly picks up the trail to find Art standing over a once again unconscious Jonathan. Out of desperation from being exhausted and severely injured, she begins to throw a barrage of ineffective punches at Art before he begins to strangle Sienna once again. Art then pushes her down into some kind of pit. She is not looking too good at this point, but she looks into a strange portal now that has opened in the pit before turning around to find Art face to face. He stabs her with her own blade that her father made her, and she falls into this mysterious portal. Art drops the blade next to the portal and heads back to finish off Jonathan. We see Sienna come into this mysterious void, and she is submerged in some kind of dunk tank that you would see at the fair. And as she looks through the glass of this tank, she is familiar with the scene from before, as we the viewer are also familiar. It is the dreamland we formerly saw Art shoot and set people ablaze in. After some struggling, being trapped in the water, she drowns, and we can see the blood and essential life force drained from the stab wound from her own blade. However, upon hearing Jonathan's screams for her after waking up to find Art toying with him, the blade Art left next to the portal begins to glow, and Sienna is resurrected. She then manages to climb out of the portal before we see her come up behind Art and drive her blade into his spine. The look on her face is somewhat psychopathic at this point, as she is determined to end this. As Art gave her one last deranged look, she goes absolutely ham sandwiches on Art's neck, swinging until she takes his head off. Thinking it is over, her and Jonathan are shocked to find the little clown girl then walking up to Art and picking up his head before she carries it into the shadows and out of sight. Some more uplifting, moody synth fades in as the scene fades out and Sienna and Jonathan are hugging, glad to have made it through their living nightmare. The credits roll, but not so fast. We are then shown a psych ward where we see the victim Victoria from the first movie wiping her own blood all over the inside of this room, all over the walls. We are also in this scene treated to a cameo of Jericho as a facility attendant. Anyways, the rest of the scene is too gruesome to go over because there is a lot going on with bodily functions and bodily fluids and stuff, but here is where I urge you that if you are going to watch this movie, make sure that you watch the credits roll. The first watch through I had when this movie came out, I didn't watch into the credits, so I really didn't know this existed until my second watch through for this video, and I wasn't disappointed. I'm happy I watched a little further. Well, that's the movie, and I might just say what a fun movie indeed. Art the Clown is a modern-day iconic slasher that the horror movie genre needed. When Damien Leone injected his vision into this genre, he gave lots of horror enthusiasts something new, fresh, and fun. Make sure to watch Terrifier and Terrifier 2 because they're both a blast, especially if you get a couple friends together. Just make sure you don't bring the weak-minded friend that gets sick very easily, or the friend that gets offended easily by extreme movies.
Oh, this movie's deplorable. Why would you invite me to watch this trash?
Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.